medicine practitioner, just my academic background is quite eclectic. The second thing is, I have patients that come in and they're totally inundated in mental consciousness. It's like an illness and it affects them physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And so in my treatment room, I bring Gebserian thought there, and I'm trying to come up with ideas to imbue magical and mythical consciousness into the treatment space, because it's almost like that mental is almost like excessive yang, and they're missing the yin of the archaic, the magical, and the mythical. So it's like we need to bring yin and yang back into balance, because that's what we do in Chinese medicine. So as I was doing my research, I came across this quote by Marie-Louise France in her book, Psyche and Matter. And really what she's looking at is kind of the non-dualistic nature of these elements. And she was very interested in the I Ching, and she wrote about it. Oh, and I just want to say, she was a contemporary of Jung's, and she did helped him with a lot of his work on the alchemical text, and she could translate Arabic, Latin, and Greek. She was an amazing scholar. And so, I'm sort of like standing up for the woman behind the man here a little bit. She's amazing. She's amazing. She wrote, "We find ourselves confronted with the strange fact that the Chinese, through intuitive introspection alone and experimenting with their own psychic state, came upon a numeric system, the I Ching, that signified information for them, and they then expanded philosophically. And now the same numeric system is discovered by Western science as the physical basis of all information, the 64 DNA codes." And so when I saw this, and I thought, wow, I'm looking at something that's much more than a delve into the ancient Chinese psyche. We're looking at a blueprint for, as the Chinese call it, the 10,000 things. So the scope of my presentation today is really going to be to take a look at the I Ching and do a little bit of consciousness history so we all understand its context. And then kind of try and point out where I believe it's got kind of inherent transparency and integrality. And then also, I want to end it. I didn't want to just talk about this. I wanted to walk the talk. So I composed a piece of music based off the I Ching, and I want to present it to you. And that was like it's like, all right, here, take this challenge. So these are the Chinese characters, and this is a bit of housework here. If we use the Wade Giles, it's I Ching, or some people say I Ching. If we use the pinyin, which is my preference, it's the Yi Ching. So just so you know that they're both the same thing, and I may say them both, but I try to go with the pinyin. So here are the 64 hexagrams. This is a painting by my friend Michael Orrick in New York City, and he loves to paint the I Ching. And this is like a 6 foot painting. It's the energy of it is incredible. And each one of the hexagrams consists of 6 lines, and they can take on 4 different states. They can be broken, solid, broken changing, or solid changing. And so kind of what's interesting about it, it's got a binary sense to it, kind of like a 0-1 on-off. But because as the I Ching progressed, those lines came to stand for yin and yang. So the solid lines are yang and the broken lines are yin. And the fact that they're changing is kind of takes into account that cosmology of yin and yang, which is that both are always present at the same time, and that they're always changing one into another. And so, when we look at the 64 hexagrams, what the ancient Chinese did here was that they laid out all the permutations of yin and yang. And so this is almost like, an archetypal description of everything that's possible. And so the first hexagram is, its tag is Tian. And Chinese speakers, forgive my pronunciation of Chinese, please. I'll do my best, which is probably not
I don't even know.
So Tian means heaven or the creative. And then the second chapter of our book is all broken lines, all yin, and its tag is kun, or earth, or the receptive. So, kind of interesting that the first 2 chapters of this ancient text focus on heaven and earth. So a little bit about the I Ching, because it's a very interesting text. First of all, I learned that it's a composite text. So it was recorded and thought up across multiple states of consciousness. So the Zhou Yi, which is the oldest text, oldest portion, is purely a divination manual. And it was recorded, scholars believe, 825 to 800 BC with an oral tradition that probably goes back to 1100 BC. And so it purely falls into kind of the magical, mythical time. And then some 300 to 600 years later, we had the commentaries that were written that are called the Shi Yi, or the 10 Wings. And the idea is that this book that was ancient, even at the time that these commentaries were being written, they were trying to give wings to this ancient Zhou Yi text. And it encompasses a lot of philosophy, yin and yang philosophy. It's got a lot of Confucian thought in it, which kind of has a sense of right, wrong to it. So it falls more into a mythical, mental time period. So here we've got this text, this composite text that covers all states of consciousness. And I mean, I even think that the archaic is inherent in it just because we don't even know where the hexagrams came from. And, you know, often these mathematicians or people, they have solutions to formulas that come to them from their dreams. And so, you know, and I'm going to share with you a couple of myths about this, but even, you know, maybe its inception is archaic. So to give a sense of the magical period, and I have to say I'm an advocate for the magical, and not in a new agey kind of way, but in the way of, God, it's so needed because we're all so caught up in the mental. And so I thought I'd tell you a story about how the Zhou dynasty came into being. And so this is an image of King Ban, and in 1059 BC, he received an insight from heaven, which was called the Tianming. So it was the mandate of heaven, or the will of heaven. And it was recorded, you know, they had a lot of bronze cauldrons, and they recorded their history on them. And it was recorded as the red crow that perched on the Zhou altar to the soil. And what it was a rare alignment of 5 planets that happened like every 516 years. It was Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, Mars, and Venus. And it informed him that it was time for him to overthrow the Shang. And so, you know, they were neighbors, they intermarried and everything, but the Shang were clearly in power. And so he started the taking over of the Shang, and did not complete it in his lifetime, but some 14 years later, his sons were able to complete that process for him. It's also really important to know that the king's job during both the Western Zhou and the Shang dynasty was to divine. That was his whole organization was to know the unknown, to connect heaven with earth. And so, and you know, and that was for the survival of the kingdom as well as for the flourishing of the kingdom. And so it was done in 2 ways. They scorched tortoise shells with a hot poker, and then they would look at the lines that formed, and they would listen to the cracking sounds, because we're in magical consciousness here. And then it was always backed up by the counting of the Yara wands, which then would give them the hexagram, and then they would refer to the Zhou Yi to figure out what the divinary text was. And scholars say that probably there was only one Zhou Yi written down on bamboo slips, probably 64 bamboo slips, each one with a hexagram and its magic value that was used, excuse me. So, and by the time that we're into the Western Zhou, the whole divinatory process was so organized and so important that an ancient book written in the 4th century BC called the Zhou Li tells us that the royal organizational state had these various offices. The first one was run by the Dajue, the Grand Master of Music, who oversaw all the music at rites and sacrifices. We had the Daju, the Grand Invocator, who oversaw the director of shamans, who had 227 shamans underneath him, both men and women. The Dabu, the Grand Diviner, who was in charge of divination, both of turtle and yarrow, the interpreter of dreams and oracle consultation. And then Da Shur, the Grand Scribe, who recorded everything and also managed the calendar to make sure that auspicious dates were selected for celebrations, sacrifices, and ceremony. So, you know, coming back here, when the Shi Yi came into being, the time between the Zhou Yi and the Shi Yi, a lot of stuff happened. Okay, so one of the things was that Confucius lived. We also had Lao Tzu, Zhuangzi, Taoism came to being. the yin-yang theory happened, the 5 phases. And so it was a very wonderfully, philosophically flourishing time as we moved from magical, mythical into more mythical, mental. But it was also an incredibly tumultuous time. So the Warring States period, all these fiefdoms in the area that was China were fighting for control, and 1.5 million people were killed during this time, which was roughly 10% of the Chinese population. So it all ended when the Qin finally took control and won out. And their king at the time, King Zheng, declared himself Qin Shi Huang Yi, the first emperor of China. And he was a tyrant. The first thing he ordered was a burning of all books. And he especially targeted Confucian texts. They say that the Zhou Yi was not banned because it was a divination manual. He also buried alive all the Confucian scholars. He finalized the Great Wall to keep out the barbarians from the north. And he also wanted immortality, so he had a mausoleum built with the 6,000 terracotta soldiers. The Han finally took over. And the Han is another wonderfully golden period in Chinese history. And it was in the Han dynasty that the Zhou Yi and the Shi Yi were combined into the I Ching and canonized it in 136 BC, which meant that nobody else could add commentaries to it. And they literally wrote it on stone. They put it onto 46 giant stelas, of which about 10% still exist. There's like fragments. Okay, so, and I just want to share a couple of things out of the Shi Yi to give you a sense of its kind of mythical beauty. This is a quote that's taken out of the 5th wing, which is called the Great Treatise. And they're talking about the Book of Changes. Yi being wholly aligned, being aligned with heaven and earth, can wholly set forth the Tao of heaven and earth. Yi looks up to observe the patterns of heaven and looks down to examine the veins of earth. It knows the causes of darkness and light, origins and ends. It comprehends the meaning of birth and death, how form and essence fuse in an entity, last until the soul departs in alteration. It knows the conditions of souls and spirits. Being an account with heaven and earth, it does not go contrary to them. Its knowledge embraces all things, and its Tao assists all unto heaven. Thus it does not err. Thank you. Sorry, got left out. And then we also have 2 myths that are noted in the Great Treatise, which are to explain where the hexagrams came from. And I wanted to share with you because they're beautiful. These patterns are beautiful. The first is the Low River document, and the myth says that during the Xia dynasty, which was before the Shang, that a tortoise stepped out of the Low River with this pattern on its back. Interestingly, when we count up all the dots and the numbers, it's a magic square. So all the vertical and the rows and columns and the diagonals all add to 15. The second myth is that of the Yellow River myth. And in this myth, Fu Shi, who was an ancient mythic ruler, saw a dragon horse, which I don't really know what a dragon horse is, but saw a dragon horse step out of the Yellow River, the Huanghe, and with this pattern on its back. And when we count that up, these numbers, what's really interesting is that the outermost numbers are what are referred to as the Xiang numbers. And those are the numbers that determine when you're either throwing coins or counting the Yarrow stocks, what type of line is going to appear in your hexagram. And I'm going to refer to them when we get to the musical composition piece. So anyway, in stepping back from all of this and looking at this thing that on first glance just looks maybe like a numeric kind of codex or something, we see that it's so much more. It's got quality and meaning. It maybe has archetypal significance of all these different archetypes. It's a connector between heaven and earth, and maybe it could even be a golden key into integral consciousness. And so, talking about trying to give examples of what these words mean, I thought that I would turn to another couple of interesting numeric codes. And I had to share my beloved Fibonacci series, which was known as early as 200 BC by a Hindu an Indian mathematician. And you can see it's kind of got that same binary sense to it. It starts with 0, 1, and then 1 + 1 is 2, 1 + 2 is 3, 2 + 3 is 5. That's how it works. And when those numbers are laid out, we get what is a nautical shell pattern, a golden spiral, which is not only found in shells, but is found in things like this beautiful aloe vera plant. Mm-hmm. And and then we've also got the golden mean or the divine proportion. And I think it's like a Zen koan when I try and track it. So the idea is that A is to A plus B as B is to A. And then when we take that divine proportion and put it into a circular format, it's what forms the location of the intricacy in the inside of a sunflower. And so, you know, and I had to do a little advertisement for this man. I just found his stuff on the internet, Cristobal Villa, and he's done this beautiful film that he takes all those numeric properties and turns them into objects, and even shows how the patterns on a dragonfly's wings are formed via a mathematical formula. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now getting into my walk the talk thing. So I thought, you know, I was kind of creating this presentation, doing the study, and I just thought, geez, I'm so, you know, the I Ching overwhelms me so much, so I'm just gonna do something with it as opposed to trying to understand it mentally, because I'm having a hard time doing that. So I threw the I Ching with the idea of composing music in mind, and I got hexagram number 18, and I put the Xian numbers up the side to show what the number associated with the typical line is, and then the 2 dots were the 2 changing lines that I got in my hexagram. And then when you change out the changing lines, you get hexagram number 59, which I've also indicated with the Xian lines. And the oracle for number 18, and I'm using the Zhou Yi translation, Richard Rutt's translation. So it's got none of the commentaries, none of the like Confucian moralizing added, and it's just it's what the Zhou did. It's magic. And its tag is Gu Mildew, Supreme Offering, favorable day for fording a big river. And I thought, wow, that's a good sign for composing a piece of music. And then when I wrote it, found out what the 2 changing lines are: mildew for a deceased male ancestor, some trouble, great misfortune. 5th line, mildew for a deceased male ancestor, use a U laudatory incantation. And so a deceased male ancestor, I thought of my father, who was a consummate jazz trombone player who passed. And this idea of mildew in the Zhou and the Shang, they when they would make offerings to the ancestors, they would make offerings of food and drink. And if they had disregarded them for a while, that offering would mildew on the altar. So it's like this idea, boy, no, I hadn't thought of my dad in a while. And I had not also done any kind of a laudatory incantation. So I thought, well, this could all be in his honor. And then 59, so when there's no changing lines, the hexagram itself is the oracle. And this one is: the king is present in the ancestral temple, favorable day for fording big river, favorable augury. So in composing the music, what I did was I decided to use a minor pentatonic scale. And I did that because the ancient Chinese liked pentatonic scales, and I selected a minor scale because I needed it to have darker overtones. I mean, the oracle said, some trouble, no great misfortune. Major would just be too much. So a minor pentatonic scale sounds like this. And so what I did, and so I assigned a Shang line to each one of the notes in the pentatonic scale. And so then here's hexagram 18, and you can see starting at the bottom line, which is how you build a hexagram. I put those in for notes, and I decided this was going to be my melody line.
Yeah.
And then the 59, I took that one and took the Xiang notes, and I decided to use this as my bass line. And so what I ended up with was a musical piece that's called Opening You and Me. And it took me 6 weeks to compose it. I'd get up usually in the mornings. And my rule was that, you know, I used those hexagram seeds, but then I was just to allow whatever came to come to me, and that I would use it. It was not a conscious thing. I wanted to build it from the inside out, so to speak. And so, I sent the melody line to a friend who plays electric guitar, and he riffed a little bit on it and sent those back to me. One morning I woke up and lyrics had appeared, I wrote them down, and so I'm gonna sing them in this. I'm not the world's best singer, but hopefully it's enough to get the point across. And then I had, about 5 years earlier, I'd been in Istanbul and had been at the Blue Mosque, and I chanced to record a call to prayer. And so I got this notion one morning, it's like, oh my gosh, I need to add that call to prayer into this piece. So I'm going to play it, but before I do that, and I just wanted, one other thing I need to add. Since we're also caught up in mental consciousness, I turned it into a film. So I decided it needed to have visuals. And so I used my friend Michael's paintings are in there, my paintings are in there, and photographs of, my photographs from Colombia, Peru, Colorado, Utah are used throughout. And then I decided to, after I composed it, did not do this a priori, I looked at where the golden section fell in the music, and you can do that by taking the length of the piece and then multiplying it by 0.618 and then the opposite of that. And what I discovered is that one of the golden means comes right when the second verse starts to come back in, and it's an image of a road. And then this other one happens when there's an image of a mandala and the word love is used for the first time. So I thought kind of like that was propitious, I thought. Okay, so now I'm going to play my movie for you. I'm hoping it's going to work. I'm hoping you're going to like it. All right, so here goes. And I hope we can see it and everything. Can you see it? No. Why? Mine's kind of gray. But you know what? My visuals aren't showing. I wonder why that is. It's on theater. It's on my movie theater. I just don't do it. Oh, here, let me get this out. Wait, let me do this. Let's see, sorry. Okay, wait. Oh, wow, where'd you move it, Johnny? Now I can't find it on my screen. Where'd you get it back on my screen? I mean, you moved it to the side, but I can't see it. Yeah, but move it over so that the mountain scene doesn't show. I don't know where it like disappeared to. Okay, good. Okay, go. Okay, go.
Oh. Yes.
I'm gonna let the credits run because they're kind of fun, just so when you see my credits. Thank you guys.
Harrison's song was- I thought for sure when you said your dad was a jazz trombone player, it's not like, don't mean anything if it ain't got anything.
Great stuff. Oh my God.
Oh.
So like, the visual markers for what the golden mean was.
Yeah.
It's